years, men were vanishing from Indianapolis gay bars, but outside that community, almost nobody seemed to notice. Rumors spread quietly through nightlife circles about strangers, late-night encounters, missing friends, and men who simply never came home. At first, it sounded like separate tragedies. One man gone here, another gone there. Somebody stopped answering calls. Somebody missed work. Somebody left a bar and disappeared into the night. But eventually, the pattern became too hard for people inside the community to ignore.
Then one survivor came forward with a story that sounded almost impossible. He told police about a wealthy man calling himself Brian Smart, a secluded estate outside the city, an indoor pool, mannequins arranged all around the room, and a strangulation attempt that he barely survived. At first, the story seemed unbelievable. Then one clue led them straight to Fox Hollow Farm. And that clue exposed one of the darkest criminal investigations in Indiana history. I'm Dustin.
And I'm Jimbo, and this is The Monster of Fox Hollow. Before we say the name everybody knows by now, we have to go back to the way this case actually unfolded, because nobody started with a full picture. Nobody started with the phrase serial killer. Nobody started with national headlines, forensic genealogy, documentaries, or people arguing theories on the internet 30 years later. In the beginning, there were missing men, worried friends, terrified families, and a survivor trying to explain something that felt too strange to be real.
But outside that property in Indianapolis, people were already afraid. Men connected to the city's gay nightlife scene had already been disappearing. These were not disappearances that immediately shook the whole state. They did not become front page emergencies. They did not create the kind of public panic that might have happened if they had belonged to a more protected and publicly visible group. And that matters. This is the early 1990s. Being openly gay could still cost people their jobs, families, housing, churches, friendships, and their own safety. Some men were out, some men weren't. Some had families who loved them despite their choices. Others lived parts of their lives quietly because society forced them to. So when men disappeared from gay bars, the response from the wider world was often slower, colder, and more dismissive than it should have been. Inside that community, people did notice. They noticed when familiar faces stopped showing up. They noticed when somebody went out one night and never came back. They noticed when missing posters started popping up in their safe places, the bars, the clubs, the community spaces, the places where these men could come and breathe, to be themselves and escape judgment, even if it was just for a few hours.
The warning spread quietly. Don't leave alone. Watch who you get into a car with. If somebody seems strange, listen to that feeling. Bar owners reportedly warned people. Friends watched each other more closely. Local gay publications paid attention long before the mainstream media really understood the scope of what was happening. And still, men kept vanishing. The problem was that there was no clean case yet. Not the kind police departments like, at least. There was no single crime scene. There was no body found right after a disappearance. No obvious suspect standing over evidence. There were fragments, rumors, last sightings, names spoken in bars, one missing man after another, but not enough hard proof to force everybody to admit the pattern. One of the missing men whose case helped push people to keep asking questions was Roger Goodlett. He was reported missing after going out in Indianapolis. His friends and loved ones were worried, and his disappearance became one of the cases that pulled attentions toward the gay bar scene. Missing posters went up, people talked, people wondered who he might have left with. And that is where the survivor story begins to matter. In newer public records, The survivor is identified as Tony Harris. In older accounts and some older true crime coverage, names and aliases around this witness have varied. But for this series, because newer coverage has publicly used the name, we are going to call him Mark Goodyear.
Mark was not walking into this with full transparency either. He did not know he was stepping into one of Indiana's most famous murder investigations. He did not know that decades later, people would still be arguing about what happened inside Fox Hollow Farm. At first, he was just a man in the nightlife scene who crossed paths with somebody calling themselves Brian Smart. Brian Smart did not represent himself like a monster from a movie. That's what's important. Predators do not usually show up wearing a sign that says, "Hey, I'm a danger." Brian came across as an older, wealthy, confident in some ways and awkward in others. He talked about finances and money and talked about property and carried himself like someone who had access to a world outside of downtown Indianapolis. And to somebody meeting him at a bar, that might not instantly scream danger. Probably a little bit more odd than anything. Maybe he was a little bit too intense, too eager to impress. But there is a huge difference between this guy is strange and this guy could be connected to men disappearing. Most people do not make that leap in real time. It takes time to figure this out. According to later accounts, Brian Smart invited Mark back to his home outside of the city. Not a motel, not an apartment, not in the back of a parking lot. A large, secluded home, a place with privacy, a place where somebody could bring another person and not worry about being seen or overheard. He said there was a pool. And that is where the geography of the story becomes important. Because the drive itself became part of the fear. At first, you're still in Indianapolis. You're in the city. There are lights, there's traffic, there's bars and people. Then as you start to drive north, the roads get a little bit quieter. The city starts falling behind you. The lights start fading away. The comfort of being around witnesses disappear. The farther Mark gets from downtown, the more isolated everything starts to become. And eventually, they arrive at a secluded estate outside of Indianapolis in Westfield, Indiana.
Now, Dustin, that's something that's very important that people need to understand. We are from Indianapolis and we are from this area. The city of Indianapolis is pretty big, pretty populated, pretty lit up. But as these past 30 years have come and gone, the population has boomed so much. The towns and suburbs are blowing up. So there's really not
years Westfield is almost can't even know where you're at because it's changed so much. This was a pretty secluded place. Today we drove by it, a couple months ago. It's a gated community where it's at now, where this was an estate that was out most likely by itself with neighbors not very close. There's a walking path.
Mm-hmm.
There's like the Cardinal Greenway or whatever it is, goes right up to where a lot of these bodies were found.
The Monon Trail too is right there.
The Monon Trail. Yeah. I'm used to being where I'm from, and it's the Cardinal Greenway. But yes, in the rich area, it's the Monon Trail.
Right. So as Dustin and I were there, and we drove around because we couldn't get into the property, obviously. But the Monon Trail,
but they're like password, and we're like
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, but the Monon Trail goes right back up to the property, basically. So, in our thoughts and minds, when we discover what's on this property, could this been an easy way to get people off and on the property too? So that's something to keep in mind too. I just want people to realize that at the time that these murders were taking place or whatever happened on the farm takes place, it was still country roads back then. It wasn't as populated as it was now. And so think yourself, if you're going out into the country and a bunch of farm fields and all that, that's probably what it looked like back then. But now it's like a little city with a Target and everything there now. So
for the Hoosiers that listen to this, they're going to get a kick out of this. I remember going to Conner Prairie and Fishers as a kid. And when you get off the interstate, it was like all country.
Mm-hmm.
I went as an adult for a meeting that was at work that they had at their event center. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Like, this used to be out in the middle of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
Like, traffic's busy. Like, there's all kinds of stuff that's blown up, and it's just north of there, not exactly north, but I mean, it's in the vicinity. And this whole area, Carmel, Zionsville, Westfield, it has blown up, and it's one of the richer zip codes in the country now.
Right. So the place that Mark was taken to was known as Fox Hollow Farm. Again, at this point in the story, Mark does not know the name means anything right now. He does not know what the woods will eventually reveal. He just knows he has been brought to a large private property far from the bars where people last saw him, and then he goes inside. The house itself did not feel normal to him. According to later accounts, one of the strangest details was the indoor pool area. Not just because the house had an indoor pool, which already sounds like a rich person nonsense, right?
What's the point of a pool if you're inside? I thought the point of a pool is to go outside.
You got to have both in case it rains, buddy. But because of what was surrounding and around the pool, there were mannequins. Mannequins positioned around the pool that were dressed. They were arranged. Some were standing, some were sitting, but they all looked like little silent figures. If you walked into a room and there are mannequins around an indoor pool, that is not quirky. That is not, oh, this guy likes antiques. But Brian Smart would go on to tell Mark Goodyear that while helping renovate his boss's house, the mannequins helped keep him company.
That's like warning sign number 2. Because the first one, you just drove like 30 minutes north of the city. Warning sign number 1. Warning sign number 2, this guy's a hoarder and he's got mannequins everywhere.
Well, when he starts getting advice from the mannequins, then we're really going to start to worry, right? But, there are different levels of weird, okay? You got Jimbo weird, then a couple notches above me, you got Dustin weird, okay? So there's different levels of weirdness here.
I'm eccentric. That's what we call it.
But there's a guy who might collect salt and pepper shakers. That's pretty weird, right?
That's a warning sign, too.
Yeah. There's a guy with one of those creepy singing fish on the wall is weird, right? Like, take me to the river, right?
Have you seen?
Or don't worry, be happy.
There's a restaurant where you can donate your Billy Bass.
Oh, no.
It's got hundreds of them. Like, if you've got more than one Billy Bass hanging on your wall, which I think our listeners aren't creepy and aren't that weird, you probably got a problem.
But hey, if they are, thanks for listening, right? But
a download's a download. You can be as weird as you want. We don't judge.
But when you got a guy that has mannequins watching an indoor pool, that's probably your chance to say, I'm out of here, right? That's a hard pass for me, dog. I'm out.
Yeah. Even if they're female ones, like, it's just still creepy. Oh, I thought you were going to add on to that. So,
I'm waiting for you, buddy.
When you're already there, far from the city, with somebody you don't really know, it's not always that simple. Mark had to read the situation. He had to stay calm, and at first, the conversation continued. Brian then shifted the conversation between ordinary talk and some darker, touchier subjects. Eventually, the conversation turned towards strangulation, control, and autoerotic asphyxiation. You didn't think that was on your bingo card today, did you?
That you still pronounced it wrong.
Autoerotic asphyxiation?
Asphyxiation, right?
Yeah, that's what I said. I signed it. Yeah, my allergies are getting me, so leave me alone. So this is where the mood and the vibe start to change as they're hanging out by this indoor pool in the middle of nowhere. Because this wasn't an awkward conversation just about sex. According to the survivor's account, Brian Smart talked about asphyxiation in a way that felt familiar, casual, and disturbing all at the same time. Like, this wasn't some random thought that popped into his head. It felt rehearsed, like a script, and something that he has probably done before. And then, near the pool, as I'm assuming things start to get a little hot and heavy, the encounter turns violent. According to later reporting, Brian Smart placed a pool hose around Mark's neck and began to tighten it, because I think they kind of started, I'm a little rusty, it's been a minute since I dove really deep into this. I think it was like, yeah, you can do it to me first. And you get this euphoric sensation. And he kind of talks him into it. But as it began to tighten, Mark started to understood that there's a good chance he could die in this house. And then came the line that investigators and journalists kept returning to. Sometimes mistakes happen. And you go a little bit too far. That line is chilling because of not how calm it is, not the panic, not the rage, not, oh, I lost control. Just the flat, detached idea that if somebody dies during this, well, mistakes happen. Today, if you're into that kind of stuff, I would say you should probably have a contract written up. Just in case, it probably won't hold weight in court, but I would cover your bases if you're into this kind of stuff. That is not the language of somebody who fears death. That's the language of somebody who is making room for it. Mark later describes surviving, but staying calm. This is the part of the story where it becomes kind of hard to sit with. Because every instinct in your body would tell you to fight, to scream, to run, do something. It's fight or flight. But you don't know where you're at. 30 minutes north of downtown Indianapolis. You could be anywhere. If you escaped, who's to say that you're going to make it very far? Nobody's going to probably hear you scream at this point.
You probably don't know how big the property is you're on either.
No, and do you go out the front? You got you don't know where you're going.
And especially if you've been drinking at the bar before you got down there too, right?
Yeah, you're going to be making some questionable decisions. But he believed that if he escalated the situation, it's probably going to make this worse. So he talked. He de-escalated the situation. He tried to keep Brian calm enough to stay alive. That takes the kind of survival instinct that most people never have to test, and I hope you never do. He's in a strange house outside the city. That's all the stuff I already said. Getting ahead of myself. Near an indoor pool surrounded by mannequins with a hose around his neck, and the person doing it calmly suggesting that death can be brushed off because it's just a mistake. Dude, like, I'd be creeped out.
I would say, at what point would you have fled?
I don't care if I'm butt ass naked. I'm running out. Like, I'm getting, like, you get yourself, like, in life, you come across some situations that you're just like, okay, this doesn't feel right. That's beyond that. That's like, okay, like, my life is on the line and I win. I survive. That's my mentality. In some way, somehow, I am going to survive. But eventually, Mark got out. He regained himself. The pressure started to ease, and he left Fox Hollow Farm alive. But he did not leave with a feeling that he simply escaped one strange sexual encounter that had gone too far. He left with the feeling that this had been practiced. The pool, the mannequins, the conversation, the hose, the calmness, everything felt staged. As if this is something that happens on a regular basis. And this is where the survivor's account becomes much bigger than just one night. Because Mark wasn't saying, hey, I met a weird man. He was saying, hey, I may have been in contact with the person behind all these missing men.
How long would it take you to go to the police if this happened to you, Dustin?
As soon as I got him, I got dropped off and he pulls away, I'm looking for a license plate. I'm looking for something to write it down. And I'm going to the first phone, the first person, whatever I can get to. And I know sometimes you kind of live in fear. Like I said, the 90s wasn't an open time for, homosexuality. It's a time where people lived in fear. And we've already talked about how crimes involving them, people, weren't taken seriously. They weren't priority. But still, no matter what, if even the cards are stacked against you, you got to do something.
Mm-hmm. So in 1994, Mark contacted Indianapolis detective Mary Wilson and told her what had happened. Wilson was already looking into the missing gay men. She had heard the fear. She understood that something may be connecting these cases, and now she had a witness describing a specific man, a specific method, a specific kind of encounter, and a specific kind of property. But there was still a massive problem. Brian Smart was not a real identity. How are you going to find somebody that doesn't exist? And this is where the police work gets frustrating, because from the outside, people say, well, he told you them about the house. Why didn't they just go there? But it's not that simple.
How many houses are in the suburbs of Indianapolis?
And how many look the same? These cookie cutter houses, they could all look the same, right? He did not have an address. He had no alias. He had memories of a drive. He had the feeling of being in a secluded place. That's not enough to kick in the gates of every wealthy property outside of Indianapolis, because that would take you forever.
You can go to a place that you've never been before, and you have to kind of remember, this is before GPSs and all that, and before MapQuest. Which way did I come in? I got to come out and turn. I turned right, so I have to come out and turn left.
Right.
Like, you had to try to piece this together turn by turn in your head, and it's probably impossible.
Well, let's think about it. Both of us have went to the Red Barn Summer Theater this year. If I didn't have my GPS on my phone or in my truck, I'd never be able to find that place again, because it's in the middle of the cornfields, right?
Well, I know how to get there from being in town, but I didn't remember going through the country, because it's two different,
Right.
You're in the main, strip of the town. You turn here versus I'm going down a country road. I don't know where the hell I'm at.
So that's the way I was coming, because I was coming from the opposite way.
And then there was a cop, and she's like, "You got your seatbelt on?" Like, well, let's just take it easy.
So Detective Wilson could believe him. She could actually take him seriously. She could keep pushing and pushing, but legally, belief is not the same as a warrant. Police need evidence a court will accept. They need a name. They need a license plate. They need a location, something solid enough to move from suspicion into action. And while investigators were struck trying to identify Brian Smart, families and friends were still looking for the missing men. Some people felt police were not doing enough. Some families turned to private help. They're going to hire their private detectives, whatever they can, to help find their missing people.
And I don't know, in this story, I'm not super versed with all the victims, but you have to remember too, there's probably people who were estranged from their family who didn't know that they were missing for probably weeks and months.
Oh, yeah.
The only people that knew were, the other regulars, if they were a regular at these bars.
Yep. The frustration was not just that men were missing. It was that the disappearances seemed to be happening in a world where too many people in power were too slow to care. That is one of the ugliest truths around the whole Fox Hollow incident. The victims were mostly gay men at a time when crimes against gay men were too often minimized, misunderstood, or just plain ignored. That does not mean every investigator failed. Mary Wilson is often remembered as someone who did pay attention, but the larger system moved slowly, actually too slowly. And while that system was moving slowly, Brian Smart was still out there.
Months had passed. The case didn't break open. Mark had survived, but his information had not yet been enough to identify anybody. The missing persons cases remained open and unsolved. The rumors kept spreading. And then sometime later, Mark saw Brian Smart again. Imagine that moment. You survived something like what happened. You told police. You don't know if anybody's ever going to find him. Then you see him again in the same space where these men are disappearing from.
I could call that the moment I pooped my pants, right? Like, oh no, this guy probably knows I went to the police. Is he here for retaliation?
And it's one of those, I feel like if you were Mark Goodyear, knowing what we know only to this point, you have to expect him to probably show up again.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have a guard up. Are you dressing the same way that you dressed? Are you going to the same places? Are you trying to lay low thinking that this person could come back? Or do you think it was just a one-time thing that you're never going to see this guy again? That's, one of those questions that you just don't really know. So this was the chance, maybe the only chance. Mark knew that if Brian Smart disappeared again, investigators could lose him for good. Or he or someone helping him would either, Mark Goodyear or another patron got the license plate number from the vehicle that Brian Smart was in, and they passed that along to Detective Wilson. And this one detail changed everything. A license plate that finally turned Brian Smart from a ghost into a man that was driving a vehicle that was registered with the Department of Motor Vehicles, or the Bureau. Is it I don't know what it is here in Indiana.
BMV.
I just know they take our money.
And you wait a long time up there in your neck of the woods.
No, it's not too bad, but like
that one day we went, it was up there.
It's just, no, it's because we had to make 2 trips. But you have this registration that's registered with the BMV. You have a real name. It gives you a real address. That address is a real property. Police would trace the plate back to Fox Hollow Farm. For the first time, investigators finally had something solid. A survivor's account was no longer floating around with an alias attached to it. It was now connected to a wealthy property owner in Westfield, Indiana. Connected to a husband, a father, a businessman, a man with a public life that didn't look like anything from the story Mark Goodyear told. And this contradiction is what really makes the next part of this story so disturbing. Because Fox Hollow Farm didn't look like a place where men would disappear. It looked like a place where somebody successful lived. It sat on roughly 18 acres of wooded land. It was private. What do they call it? Like a Tudor style house? Is that?
I don't know.
I don't remember the exact style of the house. But if you Google it, you'll see they'll tell you. This is where if I was working with Kevin, we would have an ADD break and I could come back with an answer. But we're not. But there's this nice, impressive, I'm going to say at the time you can call it a mansion. It was removed from the city, but not so remote that you would imagine unimaginable crimes happening here. That's the disguise. Not a mask over the face. A mask made out of real estate, money, marriage, children, business cards, and, just the suburban respectability that you would have as a wealthy upper middle class person. Detective Wilson now had a suspect to look at, but looking isn't the same as proving. The man connected to the license plate was not someone the public would imagine as a predator. He had a family. He ran a small business. He lived in a large estate that looked from the outside like somebody who was building the perfect normal life.
But Mark's story said otherwise. Mark had described a secluded property. He had described mannequins near an indoor pool. He had described a conversation about strangulation. He had described a hose around his neck. And now the plate led to a real estate property that matched the shape of what he had survived. Investigators wanted to search Fox Hollow Farm, but when they approached the family, the request was refused. That is another painful turning point. Police believed they were close to something major, but they still did not have enough to force their way onto the property.
Because in reality, all we have is a story. There's no evidence. There's nothing physical that you can attach to it.
Right.
So you're left with one person's word.
And this is where some of our listeners, might start getting frustrated because we know the ending. If you've been around true crime or listened to podcasts or documentaries about Fox Hollow, you know where this is heading. We know what they are going to find in those woods. But police at that moment, they did not have the ending. They had suspicion. They had a survivor. They had an alias connected to a plate. They had missing men, but they still had to operate inside the law. And so Fox Hollow remained out of reach to them.
And I'm sure at the time, too, you're going to have people looking to, humiliate somebody possibly if they found out that they were gay, or it could be somebody trying to get revenge. So, there's a lot of reasons why the police just can't barge in and say, here's a search warrant. We were told a story.
And honestly, that's the correct way to proceed about things. The police did things the right way, right? Because they don't have what they need to go search the property. They asked, they said no, right?
So what happens if you go in, and this is just, armchair quarterback 30 years later, and what if you go in and you find evidence that you did not get legally?
Then it'll probably be thrown out in court.
It jeopardizes everything. So even if there is some suspicion, it's frustrating, but you have to proceed within the parameters of what you're expected to work around.
Because if they did find anything in there, it's not going to be admissible in court because they did it wrong. We find that out in a lot of court cases today, right?
And it's so frustrating to be like, we know this person did, but it's like, well, it wasn't, they weren't read their rights, or this didn't happen, and everything gets thrown out.
Right. Meanwhile, inside the gay community, the fear kept growing. People were warning each other. Some men were more careful about leaving bars alone. Some people believed there was a predator. But outside those circles, the story still had not become the massive public emergency it should have been. Think about how terrifying that would be. The people closest to the danger can feel the pattern. They see the missing posters. They can even name the bars the Patreons were at. They can tell you who vanished. But the wider world is not responding with the urgency they need. So the community becomes its own warning system.
And at the time, it did not. And that's what gives this story such a terrible sense of momentum. The clues were not all hidden. Some were right in plain sight. There's a survivor, an alias, a license plate, which, the car he used the first time wasn't his. So where did it come from? That's another question. That's later. You had men that were missing. But each piece had to fight its own way through the disbelief, the legal limits, the stigmas, and the public image of the man living behind the gate. By 1995 and into early 1906, the pressure around the men connected to Fox Hollow Farm was building. Or the man, sorry. I said man, singular. His marriage was deteriorating. Investigators were circling. The quiet suburban image was beginning to crack. Mark Goodyear's account gave investigators something they did not have before: a living witness and somebody who had been inside the house, someone who had seen the pool, someone who had experienced the strangulation and the behavior that he was describing. Without this, the missing men may have remained disconnected and lost even longer. That does not mean that every question about Mark's story disappears. In fact, newer reporting and documentaries have raised questions about changing details, missing evidence, and what many may or may not have been known about different people. We'll get into all these different things, because if you've watched or learned anything, there's a lot of questions, but we're going to leave a lot of those questions just off to the side right now. We'll get into that at another time. But in this part of the timeline, Mark's role is clear. His story helped point police towards Fox Hollow Farms. Maybe people could even call him a hero at this point, because this information most likely, led to less people disappearing, or probably put a stop to it. And this matters because when you have serial killer cases, they're not usually solved by one perfect clue. They're built from a lot of uncomfortable pieces. A friend who refuses to stop asking, a mother who keeps putting up the posters and just grinding through her day and pounding the concrete, trying to talk to anybody who will listen. Detectives who listen and others, dismiss this information. A survivor who remembers a fake name, who writes down the license plate in the heat of the moment, when like you said, it's fight or flight again, to be calm enough to get the information. The license plate was just the beginning. Before Brian Smart was a shadow, after the investigators had a real man, a real address, and a property they desperately wanted to search.
Police know more than they knew before. The survivor has been heard. The alias has been pierced. Fox Hollow Farm is no longer just a place from a frightening story. It is a real location on a map. The woods behind that house are still quiet. The skull has already been found and explained away, which we're going to talk about in the next episode. The missing men are still missing. The family still do not have answers. And the man known in the bars as Brian Smart is still not publicly known for what investigators are beginning to fear he might be. Because, Brian Smart was not his real name.
Yeah, we left a little teaser in there by accident. So the man behind Fox Hollow Farm was none other than Herbert Richard Baumeister. And once the investigators learn this, the story starts to become even stranger. A businessman, a husband, a father, a thrift store owner, a man from a respectable Indianapolis family. And behind all of this, the private world that had been hidden away for years. So in the next part, we're going to talk about Herb Baumeister.
And
Herb's origin story.
And if you think that this story is weird already and it's got more twists and turns, there is so much more that we're going to get to and cover. It's going to be making you question yourself by the time you're done, because Dustin and I have talked about this case for a while now, and we keep bouncing ideas off each other, going back and forth, because there's so many different stories out there. There's so many conflicting reports. You don't know which one to believe.
Evidence changes you to make you think this or a story or a statement. And it's like a psychological thriller if you were to go to the movie theater, but this is real life. It's just, there's so much, like, we're going to cover, I think, a lot. I feel like whatever we cover, there's going to be just as much information and questions still left.
Right. So on the next episode, we will be talking about the man behind Fox Hollow. So if you'd like to reach out to us, we are darkdiscoveriespod@gmail.com. If you want to leave us a review, you can leave that on Apple, Spotify, or whatever.
5-star. We don't make fun of the people who can't enunciate and pronounce and read.
AKA
so
Dustin.
Let's keep those. Oh, you sneak some words in.
Every once in a while, but I fake it till I make it right.
But we don't take shaming on third grade reading level.
We call that cyberbullying of Dustin, right?
We don't cyberbully here. We prefer to bully and joke in real life.
So, but honestly, this is one of those cases that once you hear about it and being from the area of Indianapolis, it sticks with you. And it's been over 30 years since the main thing happened, the discoveries. So you're looking at least 40 years now, 45 years that the monster was on the loose.
It ended up being the end of 96.
Right.
And
the year I graduated high school.
26.
Right.
The story, you think it's going to end at some point, but this story is still.
It just keeps going.
It's a decade from now, at least, before you can say that you know all the answers, and you're never going to know all the answers.
Right. So until next time, this has been Dark Discoveries, where the deeper you dive,
the darker it gets.